Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm so happy that this event is happening, and thank the organizers. This is such an important topic, and to see it as part of a major robotics conference is a real delight. I'm only sorry that I can't be with you on site, but I'll do my best remotely. I come here wearing two hats. One is as co-leader of a topic group within the European Commission's research program on robotics. I know some colleagues in the room, and then the other hat is Director of CELA alongside Adam, who spoke earlier. So I'm going to take a couple of steps back from where Adam was. I'm going to be talking more about some of the soft sides around standard. I know there was some questions and points in the discussion earlier, and I'll maybe try and hope to fill in some of that. So CELA and Animal, where do standards play a role? I've got three examples I'm going to point at very briefly, and then a pointer on how to get started, and hopefully leave you with an impression that standards do actually play a role in this area of closed-loop self-driving labs. So no more ado. This is a pain point we've been suffering in the lab for quite a while now. The lab of the past is disconnected devices, which work well, are quite expensive, but are largely unconnected. And even without closed-loop labs, it's a real pain in many of the industries that rely on the lab. So this lab of the future concept is that where these will be more connected and more like what we see when we're at home with our mobile phones, talking to our central heating and our entertainment devices. In the laboratory, we're really in it for the data. It's all about the data. The data is the most important outcome of an experiment. We are really not a factory, even though we may produce small amounts of material. And this data clearly fuels the analytics, so we can see what's going on, and increasingly AI and machine learning. And making the data more accessible means more of it will get use. And with many people here from the academic side and in consortia, sharing that data across the community has become so important. The question is, how do we get to that data? So traditionally, the pipeline looks something like this. We will generate the data using the samples and the instruments, and we have to control that. We then capture and store the data coming off. It has to be represented in a way that's readable by humans, but ideally by computers as well. And then we put that to use. So this is a classic pipeline in any lab, a small lab, safety lab, or a major pharma lab. And where CELA and Animal play a role, where our standards I'm going to talk about, is CELA is a communication standard. Think of it a little bit like USB in the lab, so it connects devices. You can send commands in one way, and you can get data back, but it's agnostic to the format of some of those details. In terms of the data, we work closely with Animal, I'll talk about in a moment, which is about how the data is packaged. So Animal packages sit on top of CELA. And in this context, what we're really interested in is closing that loop. So the acceleration of discovery allows the use of that data to plan the next experiment, as many of the previous speakers have already clearly explained. So a few words about CELA. It's about helping us to generate the data. It's a non-profit association, as Adam pointed out before, to establish open connectivity standards at an international level, specifically for the lab. It's a non-profit. It grew out of activities at Roche and Novartis in Basel, but as an international board. The philosophy is that it's free at the point of use. There are no licenses and no royalties, and open source code is available to all. On the right-hand side there, you'll see a map of the logos of some of the supporting companies. We have about 4,000 individual members, scientists, engineers, business people, and about 40 or so supporting members. These are the ones who pay the fees, and they have additional rights on voting on the standard. You may see some names you recognize. I point out Roche, Novartis, Takeda, Novo Nordisk, and Unilever as major users who drive what we do. You'll also see some companies like TCAN, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, as producers of leading lab robots. And there are a number of smaller companies there, innovative startups, and also universities we're happy to welcome into the community. One quick slide on CELA inside. It's a peer-to-peer service-oriented structure, microservice architecture. It's based on modern web technologies that we use every day, pretty much every hour, if you're looking up a website or using your email. So they're reliable up to a point, and they are supported by Google and the big companies we rely on increasingly. It allows feature definitions to define the capabilities, and it features feature discovery. So we can ask around and see what devices are around. Somebody brought that up in an earlier talk. and then we have a Sealer server system. In terms of the organization, Sealer as an association only develops a standard. It comes in 3 parts, a core, a mapping, and a feature. It's extendable, and that is all that the association does. However, to make that workable, it manages that process. So it's a formal process. It's not like it's a lightweight version of ISO, but it's not just people logging stuff into the repository. It actually has a voting process, and there's a community of programmers that produce reference implementations that match the standard. So there's open source in 4 language bindings at present. Say a word about Animal. So Animal is about the data format. It's an analytical markup language. That's what Animal stands for. It has been managed by ASTM in the US, but it's run by an international group. It's a format for the analytical biological data, developed by a consortium again, and it's XML based. So it's both human and machine readable. There's a core, which allows you to capture sample data, process data, and results. And there's technique definitions. So again, it's expandable and extendable and adaptable to what you want to do. Just in a diagram, there's the experiment step, and we manage just to capture both the sample, the instructions, and what happens to the results. So all of that is captured within the Animal model. I'll move on. I'll take a step back about standards. We often hear, why do we want standards? What are standards? We've never used standards. But of course, we do use standards. And a bit like automation and robotics was described earlier, once they start being used, they become a little bit invisible. We should be immensely proud about the well plate format. In this industry, many industries would envy us if only they knew about it. And it's taken 20 years to standardize on it and get the consensus we need. And it's still imperfect, but it allows us to do 100-fold, 1,000-fold productivity increases over the old-fashioned test tubes. Of course, in some disciplines in the lab, in chemistry, they have their own structures for containers for good reasons, clinical as well, but the lab plate is a fantastic innovation. And it's what we've seen in other sectors. So the container, the 40-foot shipping container, has allowed us to bring great advantages in globalization and shipping. It's a way of managing diversity through modularity and the separation of concerns was a topic that was nicely brought out in a previous talk. Let me dwell on standards a little bit, because I think they are rather poorly taught to students coming through, certainly in my day, and there's some misunderstandings about what standards are. So some people think that standards are a boring book, impersonal, and on a good day it will give you a headache, and on a bad day it will end up your boss going to jail. And that is true in some circumstances when those standards are to do with safety and regulations that must be maintained. And it's certainly hard to understand some of the standards if you just read the book. But in reality, standards are developed by a group of people, a group of professionals sitting around a table or on an online meeting, collaborating, making contacts, developing projects, developing insights, creating new business tools, and moving things forward. We don't usually see that part of standards, but we see it very visibly once you're inside ISO working groups and structures like Animal and Sealer. So the door is open to gain some of those benefits, as well as the end benefit of the standard document. There's a large literature in economics about standards. I'm not going to say more than a few words about this, but essentially there are 4 types of standard. Minimum quality safety standards is the most visible to us in our everyday lives, but Sealer and interoperability standards are really more about interface standards. So that picture there is supposed to be a plug that goes into the wall so that I can use my mobile phone, whether I'm in Japan, Switzerland, or the UK. And there's also a variety reduction standard that's meant to be a shoe or a slipper, house slipper, which is available in small, medium, and large. So the economic benefits are benefits of scale. Doing more with less. By reducing variety, we gain some benefits. And giving up that variety and freedom and creativity can be painful for some people. Where do standards fit in the innovation ladder from TRLs of pure basic research through to commercialization? Well, actually, they fit in quite well in terms of developing a vocabulary. So we've heard about ontologies before. If we don't call the same thing the same word across our community, that's going to be difficult even to do basic research. And the early papers dwell on creating new names. So self-driving labs, closed loop is already quite diverse. I think that's not really a pain point right now. But when we get to do basic research, we need to measure things and test things. Applied research, we need to collaborate and help commercialize what we're doing, go on that road go on that journey, and interfaces play a role, and compatibility and safety come in much later on when we are launching products in the market. And standardization plays a role in each of those levels. But there are many reasons not to use standards. Standards are often accused of stifling innovation, and it is indeed dangerous to standardize too soon in developing areas. We want to keep the conversation open and flowing, and the availability of standards does not mean we have to use standards. Let's be intelligent about it. But in more mature areas, there'll be rival standards like that plug I showed you. And that's not necessarily a problem. The real problem is when there are no standards. And there's this dilemma, or this two-sided balance of standards of stifling freedom, which they can do, versus standards for enabling focus. So we are going to do this at the expense of being completely free. When we name variables within our code, we give up some freedom to use a format that our colleagues will understand. Quickly move on to 3 examples. We're very lucky in the Sealer community to have Novo Nordisk, who are a very well-resourced company, as some of you will know, and are enthusiastic adopters of standards, along with a couple of others. So James Love there produced a little video. I've provided a YouTube link about the use of the Sealer standard for the automation of closed-loop processes. I'm not going to play the video, it's only 5 minutes long, but he gives a great introduction and explanation of how they are used. And they are putting the Sealer drivers for the different devices they are adopting and using on available to the community, because for them that makes it better quality and moves the field forward. They clearly make money on drugs, not on engineering, but that's a very helpful move, and other colleagues are doing similar things. Touch now on the Kiwi Biolab, which is a German initiative. I've got some old slides which mention Sealer. Now Sealer has kind of disappeared from the diagrams, which is in a way a success, but you'll see a mobile robot in the middle there, which is from Aztec Projects, which is a Sealer member. That's got Sealer inside, the Mir platform somebody mentioned earlier, the camera, robot arm from Universal Robots. It's all Sealer inside, and it's Sealer on the outside. And within the control of their systems, the TCAN, for example, can use Sealer, and the orchestrator can use Sealer. So Sealer is a very useful glue for allowing them to do their work. And they're published many, many papers, of which I referenced just the one in the bottom. And one last third example I pick up. This is a paper that was published at the end of last year. To my delight, I did not know that our colleagues at the University of Toronto, many of whom I think are in the room or at least online, have been promoting the use of Sealer as a way of gluing together their different devices, the ChemSpeed platform, and so on and so on. And you see there in the diagram, the Sealer server. I won't talk more about that. There is a paper. I'm sorry, I've lost the reference there. It's on my hidden slide. But delighted to see that people outside the direct Sealer community can read the papers, haul off the code, and propose the use in the chemistry area, which has been the focus of some of the discussion today. So how to get started? Last couple of slides. We have the GitLab repository. It's sometimes a bit hard to use. Whoops, excuse me. We've now created something called Sealer Awesome, which is available on the Sealer website, and there's a Slack community. You can ask a whole number of examples. And then there are some training videos for the Python Java, and I think I'm going to stop there. And thank you for your attention, and happy to take any questions, although I know we are tight for time. That's me for today.